Westminster's Peace and Justice Work Group is delighted to offer this evening's program. Our church has been a longtime partner with the Ministry of Caring in its Emmanuel Dining Room programs, and many of you are familiar with that. When I was putting together the information for tonight's program, I was quite frankly astonished to see that there are 19 different programs that the Ministry of Caring operates. And so I think we're all going to learn a great deal tonight about what that organization does. So I am delighted to introduce Eugene Halus, who is the Chief Operating Officer of the Ministry of Caring. Gene, how long have you been with the organization?
Little over a year. That's
Okay.
it. Yeah.
All right. And prior to this, he was Vice President of Education and Operations at Free. That is supposed to be forwarded. Hold on. As I said, devices go off whenever they feel like it. Prior to this position, Gene was the Vice President of Education and Operations at Freedom's Foundation at Valley Forge and Chair of History and Political Science at Immaculata University. He has also served on the faculty of any number of other universities, LaSalle, St. Joseph's, Newman, and has a fascinating history that involves Ireland. Maybe if we have a minute at the end, Gene, you could tell us a little bit about that. But he is a native of the city of Philadelphia, attending LaSalle High School and LaSalle University. So I guess you didn't have to change the shirt or the
No,
initials when you
nope,
went
nope.
from one to the other. And he did study at the Institute of Public Administration in Dublin, Ireland. Has an MA and a PhD from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. And Gene provided a little bit of personal information. He lives in Newark with his wife, Amy, who is a first grade teacher, and they have 4 children. And he has 2 dogs, one a puppy, Margaret Ann. I'm sure there's a story behind that. And apparently we may hear her at
Yes.
some point tonight, since she, as Gene puts it, is a cotton ball with an attitude.
Mhm.
So just so you're aware, there may be some unique attributes to this
Yes.
evening's
She's
program.
being very quiet at the moment, but my wife had to go pick up one of my daughters. So, and she is a daddy's girl. So who knows?
All
But
right.
anyhow,
Well, we're used to having speakers where cats drape themselves over
yeah.
somebody's neck, so we're quite accustomed to the animal kingdom, no problem. So let me turn it over to Jean, who has, I think, a fascinating story to tell, perhaps even including the project that completed today. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Well, it got completed to the stage where it can get started. But anyhow, let me begin. I don't know if everybody really knows the history of Ministry of Caring. We are actually heading towards 48 years in existence. Um, and it really began out of Brother Ronald's frustration. Brother Ronald was a young Franciscan and was basically assigned to be a clerk and an assistant to the provincial up on Silverside Road there in Wilmington, and clearly didn't like it. And the provincial, sort of said to him, "Well, I see you're not doing backflips over this assignment. So, what's the matter?" And he said, "I'm a Franciscan. I'm supposed to help the poor, not sit here and type, letters for the provincial." And the provincial said, "Well, if you can find some useful job, we'll talk about it." And Brother Ronald actually went out and did his research, made a lot of phone calls. And the first thing that really struck him was that he discovered that when it got really cold, those cold blue nights in the winter, that there were all these women who were homeless sleeping under I-95 right there in Wilmington, and the police, in order to, help them, really had no choice but to literally put them in jail. There were zero women's shelters on the entire Delmarva Peninsula. And he basically decided he had his calling, went back to the provincial. The provincial gave him permission to try and pursue some resolution to this matter. And that's really how Mary Mother of Hope began. Now we call it Mary Mother of Hope 1 because there's actually three of them. And it was the first women's shelter on the entire Delmarva Peninsula. No one had ever addressed the problem before then. And then shortly after that, he realized there was an awful lot of hunger in the city of Wilmington. And that other institution you're probably more familiar with, the Manual Dining Room, was established in an old firehouse at Second and Jackson. And that would be the first of three Emmanuel dining rooms. We have another one on the east side, and we have another one we call EDR South, which is just over the Newcastle, the border between the city of Wilmington and Newcastle County. I'm sorry. So that was really the beginning of the Ministry of Caring. And then he grew from there to the 19 programs and 30 buildings that we have today. But it's sort of an interesting story, the evolution that as he was presented with challenges, we expanded to meet those challenges. So over time, we created, what I think is a really unique and comprehensive system. And I have a lot of different experiences dealing with poverty and homelessness. I started working in this area when I was in high school, around 1982, 83. So I've been plugging away at this for quite a number of years. But just to give you an idea of sort of how Ministry of Caring is structured today, we have a system of shelters, and those shelters are actually coordinated in a unique way, I think. I have a shelter that's just for single women. I have shelters that are for families, and I have shelters that are for men. And I have a program director for each of those, with one program director kind of coordinating everything. But what's also attached to that is we just don't simply bring people into shelters and then, after a short stay, good luck. We actually have transitional and long-term housing, and are directed, or they're connected with each of those shelters. So the men might come into House of Joseph 1, and then they would be, moved into the transitional housing, and then from the transitional housing to long-term housing. And obviously some people might make it to transitional and they might be strong enough that they go out and get their own apartment, right? Or they find some other placement besides us. But we actually have kind of a comprehensive program to move people from a shelter to transitional housing to long-term housing, and then out, for lack of a better term, into the open market. And like I said, we have channels so that the men come in and they go through their own housing system. Single women come in and go through their own housing system. Families come in and they go through their own system. And hidden in there too, I don't advertise it very much, I have one family shelter that really is contracted specifically to help people who are victims of spousal abuse or elder abuse or that sort of stuff. And I don't really talk much about it because we do have people that come looking for them. So we do, it's kind of hidden in plain sight, and I'll leave it at that just to make you aware. It's another part of the housing system that we have. And I think it's really, really kind of a unique thing that the ministry does, so that when people come in, they have a caseworker who helps them figure out what they need to do to really begin to get back on their feet, whether it's the first thing they need to, apply for government aid or whatever the case might be, reestablish, an identity with a driver's license or a state ID, a social security card, whatever. From that simple part, moving them all the way to trying to move them all the way to complete independence. Right. And that's just the shelters. Well, on top of that, then I have three dining halls, like I would already mentioned, west, east, and south. And one of them, so I actually just remembered I left something out of the system that I want to make sure I tell you about. We are actually in the process of moving one of the dining halls. Because the facility is not that great. So it's not west, the one you probably know the best at Second and Jackson. But we are looking to relocate one of those dining halls because it's just not adequate anymore. And the landlord's not really willing to take care of it. So we're looking for another spot where we can serve people. And we think we have it, but again, it's about all I can say till we actually figure everything out. We've got a lease, we've got site control, we've got zoning. We've just got to do some other things before we fully take care of it. But they're probably the two biggest things about the ministry: the shelter and housing system, and the dining halls. Well, on top of that, we have two child care centers. So that if individuals come to us, and the whole idea is to help them find jobs and again move towards independence. Well, what's one of the biggest challenges? Childcare. So we have two childcare facilities that um, people who reside in our shelter system can opt to use. We have some people who actually gain their independence back, actually come and work for us, and they'll also use the child care centers. So they're really important. um, what's the word I want to use? Really, really important tools, I guess, for lack of a better term, that really, again, help folks in some of the more impoverished areas of Wilmington. We have a distribution center, which we just actually renamed after a woman who was a huge volunteer and a big leader in the Jewish community in Wilmington. It's now called the Ruth Balick Distribution Center. She played a really important role, in fact, in getting Emmanuel Dining Room up off the ground. The very first one there that you probably know the best, Emmanuel Dining Room West. But the distribution center is open 4 days a week. And there's a clothing bank, there's a food bank. If we have people who are moving from our transitional housing out to their own apartment, they can actually go there for furniture, for some other items. We use it to store all sorts of extras we get because, certain times of the year we might get flooded with socks or women's hygiene kits or certain types of food. And it's at least a place we can store it till we can utilize it. But also twice a week on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, we run a shuttle bus from Emmanuel Dining Hall West over to the distribution center so that people experiencing homelessness can um, use the pantry, use the clothing bank, get a shower, wash clothes. There's a whole variety of opportunities for them over there. We have a job placement center. So again, that whole idea of moving people towards independence, once they're in the shelter system, and let's assume they already have their IDs, they may have some streams of income, but they really don't have a job skill or they need more job training. Not too far from Second and Jackson, there in Wilmington, we have the Job Placement Center, and people can go there for everything from help on a resume to enrolling in classes for commercial driver's licenses, phlebotomists, certified nursing assistants. There's a number of things we do to try and help people move into a more stable environment. We have drug, alcohol, and mental health counseling that we have a provider that we work with, so that whether it's face to face or residents have the ability, like we're doing now, to do it by video conference if necessary, because obviously some of the areas where folks live are not necessarily the safest at night in Wilmington. So we prefer to let them video conference. And it's easier if there's inclement weather, this way the counselor can reach them. So each of the shelters, has their own computers and video conference system. We have a dental office. If you're not aware, a dental clinic. We currently, it is closed. And the only reason it's closed is, if you're not aware, becoming a licensed dentist in Delaware is an absolutely Homeric task. It is brutal. You can go to I can tell you right now, Wilmington Hospital has about 9 clinicians who have degrees from places like Harvard, Yale, Penn, Iowa, all these different places. That was the class last year. I haven't looked at the class this year. And they have to do a year's clinical, even though they may have graduated from dental school and pass the licensing exam. They have to do a full year of that clinical at a hospital environment before they can practice in Delaware. And Delaware already has a shortage of dentists. I have literally been looking for a dentist now for probably 8 months. I've hired headhunters to even try and find them. And finding a dentist is actually pretty brutal. We had a dentist and she established her own practice actually about 10 minutes from my house. And I go to her and I'm trying to convince her to come back once a week or to accept patients at her office and get permission from the foundations that funded us to use that money to treat them at her office. So it is one challenge I really face right now as the chief operational officer. We don't have a dentist, and we're desperate. So if anybody's a dentist, have a chat with me. It really is a tough role to fill. Um, we also have our men's shelter is called House of Joseph 1, but we also have another property called House of Joseph 2, which is an old Brandywine village in that section of Wilmington. It is specifically for people living with HIV. It was originally founded years ago, really as a hospice where people with AIDS would go to die. And now that the medical community has found more effective ways to treat HIV and AIDS, we now, I'm happy to say, have people who've lived there for 16 years, and just need help with managing their HIV medications, that sort of stuff. The facility only holds up to about 16 people. But it really is a beautiful facility for people who are, in addition to having HIV, also have some other kind of disability. Um, and then we have what's called the Francis X. Norton Center, which is actually think of it's a church social hall. The Franciscan Capuchins have Sacred Heart Oratory on Monroe Street, like around 8th and Monroe, and underneath it is the old church social hall, which we own. And I have two full-time chefs who cook for the shelters. So during the week, Monday through Friday, um, dinners are made by the chefs and are dropped off at each of the shelters. And then during the weekends, what my program directors actually try to do is encourage the residents to do their own cooking. And we get food from the Delaware Food Bank. We buy food. And for them, especially the family shelters, for them to cook meals and spend time with their children. But for most of the week, they get dinners prepared by the chefs at Francis X. Norton. And then obviously, if we have functions, there'll be, our cooks. We have a cafe in one of our senior citizen facilities, which I'll talk about in a minute. So it's all a pretty complex affair. And then the really last part of these 19 programs spread across 30 sites in the city of Wilmington is I have 3 affordable housing facilities, for lack of a better term. One only has about 25 units, and then the other 2 have over 70 units. So I have Sacred Heart Village 1, Sacred Heart Village 2, the Village of St. John, which is the old Episcopal Cathedral near Tatnall Street, near Tatnall and Market. And I'm very happy and kind of exhausted because this has been going on forever to say that I just had settlement today on what will be called Villa Maria. It is right on Market Street, on the opposite side of the street from the Village of St. John, kind of catty corner to it. It's on the same block. Village of St. John's at the top of the block. Villa Maria will be kind of in the middle of the block on the other side. So the back of the property will be towards the Brandywine Creek. And when that is finally brought online in 2026, that will add another 74 units of affordable senior housing for the city of Wilmington, which, to say that is desperately needed, is an understatement. I have waiting lists at all 3 of the other facilities. And for the 2 larger ones, I have as many people or more on the waiting list as I do units. So our expectation is when we open Villa Maria, we're probably going to have to do little to no marketing because we have all these other people on wait lists, and Villa Maria is in such proximity to the other ones that folks will come really basically running. Is the expectation. And just I'll kind of cap off this, and I know it's a long summary. It's a big program. all of this is driven by a motto of the Ministry of Caring, and that is that the poor should not be treated poorly. So that's one of the other things I think is important, is that when you see our facilities, and one of the things that first impressed me, I mean, I've been in and out of homeless shelters since I was a teenager. You know, they are clean, they are safe, they are incredibly well run. They really really are. You know, if not immaculate, nearly immaculate. And when they're not immaculate, then we're on folks to get them to be immaculate. You know, and they're just very very well done, in terms of we don't cut corners in terms of whether it's appliances or anything else in particular units. I mean, they're not the Taj Mahal, but they're a heck of a lot nicer than almost anything else, because sometimes we're restricted by HUD. You know, for these senior citizen units, the largest a unit can be is 700 square feet. So, you know, it's like I said, it's not the Taj Mahal, but it's very, very nice. And when you get to the village of St. John, it's gorgeous, because it's all these old buildings associated with this Episcopal cathedral and the parsonage and this sort of stuff. And when we built, one wing is the old cathedral, the other wing is all brand new construction, but we made it to mimic the old side of the cathedral. So it really is, it really gives you the feel that you're on the old side when you're there. Um, but that is, you know, let me take a breath, right? I mean, there's quite a lot there. That is kind of a big picture of the overall operation. And let me just do one thing here. It gives you this kind of, I think, really kind of gives you a quick summary here. Hold on one second. And I'm going to reduce everybody so I can see this. We just did this recently for our board, but it kind of gives you a quick summary of what we've done over the course of 2024. The Emmanuel Dining Room served over 151,000 meals. That's an increase of 8.1% over last year. And if you don't know, homelessness is estimated to have increased by 18% last year. And unfortunately, we're expecting it to continue to go higher again this year. Our 4 emergency shelters, you know, provided 937 people with a roof over their head. And again, obviously, those people transition out to our transitional or longer term housing. Our 2 child cares provided 13,533 days of care last year. Our job placement center helped 344 people, you know, find employment. We had 40 graduates, 24 nursing assistants, 12 CDL licenses, 2 phlebotomists, 2 child care assistants. Right now, we have 153 people in senior housing. When that project Villa Maria comes online, that number will obviously go over 220. We have 104 people in long-term housing right now this evening. We have the Ruth Bailick Distribution Center, which I mentioned. But on any given night, if you go to the bottom of the page there, I think that's the telling one. The actual number is 395. Right now, as I speak to you, Ministry of Caring is housing 395 people, which is a pretty amazing sort of thing. But it provides a kind of nice, quick summary of you know, what we do. And now, of course, sorry, I'm trying to increase my screen again. But anyhow, I will stop talking, and kind of turn things over, I guess, to questions. That was the quick overview. And if anybody has questions, I am more than happy to answer them.
So if you have a question or a comment, if you would raise your hand so you can wave it, or you can use the little button. Let me see, Sally Ellsby, I saw your hand go up first.
Yeah. What do you do for funding?
Oh, that's a fun one. I can give you, I literally just ran through these numbers because And I'm looking at the chat, and a couple people suggested dentists. So I'm just jotting this down real quick so I can, call and antagonize these people and see if they'll come help us. Uh, but anyhow, thank you for the recommendations. Funding, we are actually in the process, and it's brother doesn't know it yet, but I'm going to convince him of this, is that government grants are declining. They're about 40% of our income, but you can chart over the years in recent years, they're starting to go down. They're getting harder and harder to get. And I have a really good grants team. I couldn't ask for a group that hustles more to try to find new leads and this sort of stuff. Special events bring in about 6.6% of the income. And then the rest of it comes from there. Well, and then about, what do I want to say, 30% comes from foundations. And then the remainder comes from personal giving. But I'll be totally blunt. When you really look at the hard data, and I have someone doing this with me, a consultant who used to raise tons of money for World Vision. So this is a guy who knows what he's doing. It's really a personal giving. We have to really change our focus and begin to target more. And, I don't know if you all know of a program called Razor's Edge. As you get donations, you put this information in, and not to sound, entirely partisan or cutthroat, but let's say you were all in my database. I could say, please give me donors 50 years or older. And then you would be the folks we might be talking about, hey, have you ever considered putting ministry of caring in your will or your estate? And we have at this point right now one of the biggest transitions in wealth in the history of the United States, generationally speaking. So that's not where we are now. That's kind of where, in terms of development, I'm trying to turn the ship. Because the thing is, as chief operational officer, really, I was brought in, to shadow Brother Ronald. So I kind of have two jobs simultaneously. I do much of what Brother Ronald does, or in consultation with Brother Ronald, and I'm overseeing all these programs. That's probably why I look exhausted. But the whole idea is we're not, we seem like a big organization, but the administration of it is really small. I mean, we don't have a lot of fat in the organization. And one of the challenges with that is, God forbid, but what if Brother Ronald gets hit by a bus tonight, right? Someone's got to be able to step into his role. And one of the other, we got someone in the waiting room. Hold on, I'll admit them.
I got it. I got it.
One of the other things is similar sorts of roles. Part of the reason I'm looking at development is we have a person who's worked for us for years in development. She's wonderful. She's 82. How much longer is she going to soldier on? You know what I mean? And it may not be her deciding to retire. She may get sick or whatever. I have a number of staff who are great, but they've been there for years, and we've really got to plan for that transition. So it's not just development. I mean, which was your kind of big question, but it's across the board. But that breakdown I gave you is really where our money currently comes from. And we do get occasionally lucky. Like, we had a donor come to us and say, I'll give you $1 million if you can match it. So February 13th, we'll get his $1 million. We actually were able to raise more than $1 million. So that'll be, and really what we're looking at too is, the long-term sustainability. So that money is not going to go to operations. That money is going to be invested so that you have a source of consistent income. And that's one of the other things we've looked at is running an operation this big. My annual budget is $10 or $11 million easy, just to keep the doors open, the lights open, and do what we do. $10 or $11 million a year is what we need, provided the price of eggs don't go up more, and then it may be more. But so we really do have to be thoughtful about that development part, because we have 395 people depending on us right now. And as some of those people leave and get independence, and it's a great and good thing, there's still plenty of people coming behind them. It really is a shame. It's Wilmington is increasingly becoming a city of have and have nots, and we're with the have nots. So we've got to keep kind of plugging away, trying to help. And thanks to I know it was mentioned. Some of you have been really supportive of Manual Dining Room. We're really lucky in the sense that we have all these different congregations, in not just in Wilmington and not just in Newcastle County, sometimes beyond that, who will either make meals or make financial donations. And we're lucky sometimes too with corporations, like because of Emmanuel Dining Room West, that's the main one you think of in the old firehouse at 2nd and Jackson. It's right off 95. Hormel has a major distribution center in Elkton, and sometimes people will refuse deliveries. So on their way back, they don't want to bring it back to the distribution center. So they pull right off 95 and they drop it off to us. So, I can't tell you how many times we're serving ribs because, somebody rejected a shipment of ribs or ham or whatever. But we obviously take it and put it to good use, whether it's in the dining halls or if there's an overflow, we'll send them to the distribution center. And when people come in for food, if they have the ability for refrigeration, they can take a ham with them or a turkey or, whatever it happens to be there. So yeah, it's a pretty complicated affair.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Marty?
Yes. How is it best to have someone who's in need contact you?
Sure. Well, a lot of our referrals, if you're talking about homelessness, really what the whole state of Delaware has begun to do is channel everything through the Housing Alliance of Delaware. And there's a whole referral system so they can contact the Housing Alliance. But I'll be just as honest with you. I get phone calls all the time. In fact, one that's if I had hair to tear out, I'd be tearing it out. There are very few shelters in Delaware for couples. And I had, we have a nun who runs Manual Dining Room South, and she called me and said, Gene, I have this couple that started coming in. They lost their house to a fire. He's in a wheelchair because he had such bad burns. He'd been going up to Crozier Chester Medical for treatment. And, they kind of couch surf with family or friends when they can, but they don't have any permanent housing. And I have been beating the bushes for a placement for them because, one of the unfortunate things for us is, when our shelters began, brother had to grab whatever buildings he could because he didn't have a lot of money and, all this sort of stuff. So our only handicap accessible shelter is for single women. So I can't put them in there. But, I've been beating the bushes, and the nearest place I could find was down in Kent County. And they obviously didn't want to go there because it takes them out of their whole support network. But point being that literally I've had people walk up to the front door of the administrative offices on 14th Street. And I've had the secretary at the front desk or the director of HR, whose office is right near there, call upstairs and go, Gene, there's someone here who's homeless. And I go down and, figure out, is it a single man, a single woman? Is it a family or whatever? And, bring them in, sit them in our conference room. And this is with me 24/7, 365 days a year. And I just pick up the phone and call the particular shelter director. If I don't already know, I get numbers every morning, but I don't always get to look at them right away. Is there an empty bed? Is there a place in that facility? And then I'll literally just send them over and we'll do an intake on them and deal with it. And then we'll reach out to HAD and say, hey, someone showed up at our door. But most people go through the Housing Alliance of Delaware. And there used to be some other places they could go to. It's all pretty much been streamlined through HAD. So there's a general number people can call, which I can't remember off the top of my head,
Yeah.
that, can connect them into the system.
Okay. If um if they had the immediate need, which they do,
Yeah.
have food, can they just show up at Emmanuel?
A manual dining room, when it's open,
Mhm.
serves anybody that walks in the door, no questions asked.
Okay. And
And
they are
and if you're unfamiliar, people actually get served there. So in other words, they're shown to a seat
mhm.
and someone brings them
Oops.
a plate of food. It's not like, here's a sandwich and a styrofoam cup of coffee and best of luck or
Yeah.
whatever. No,
Okay.
especially in either the heat of summer or the cold of winter, we try to let them come in and sit and either warm up and cool off. And if they want a second plate, boom, they get a second plate. They want a third plate, they get a third plate. We count the number of plates served because for some folks, this is really the only time they get a meal.
And
Or
when
we've
are
had,
they
I'm sorry, go ahead.
open? I'm sorry.
They are open 12:30 to, well, they actually do breakfast earlier in the morning, which starts at 8:30 and then goes till 9:30 or 10. And then they open again at, I believe it's 11:30 and they go till 1.
Okay.
And with what I'm trying to juggle now too is those hours may expand
Mhm.
because the one dining hall that we're looking to relocate, we may lose that location it's presently in before we can open the other one. And if that happens, then we plan to expand the hours so that if people have to, walk a further distance to get a meal, which is going to be, not what we want to do, but at least we'll make sure there's an extended opportunity. And we have a number of the sort of DART short buses. And I'm currently trying to negotiate with DART to get permission to basically run a shuttle.
That's great.
DART's pretty strict about that.
Yeah.
The really sad part is I might be able to, I think I can get permission to transport the elderly, but not little kids. I don't think they're going to give me permission for little kids as much as I'd beg and try. But we'll see.
Gene,
Yeah.
Sheridan put a question in the chat.
Okay.
Sheridan, do you want to ask it directly or you want me to read your quote?
Yeah, no, I'm reading it right now. I'm reading it right now.
Okay, good for you.
And Sheridan, you are hitting upon a problem that I have been harping on. I cannot tell you for how long. And it actually comes out of my graduate career when I was at Catholic U in the sociology department. There was a sociologist / Presbyterian minister who, thank God, he didn't grow up in Philly because his name was actually Dean Hoagie. And he was a brilliant sociologist of religion who had the fun job of telling the Catholic bishops every year, you better let in married priests or you're not going to have enough guys. And, they be friendly with them and, of course, then not do it. But this is a challenge across the board, not just for churches and they're trying to sustain their help to something like a manual dining room. To go back to the question Sally asked earlier about where our funding comes from, our donor base is graying as well. And I've been the one really pushing that we've got to do more to reach out to younger people and incorporate them into the ministry. And it's a sustainability question that I'm as worried about as you are. And I'm trying to find a path forward. But I won't pretend I have an answer yet. I mean, one of the first steps for us, I think, is there used to be a number of events that were, centered more for people in their 30s and 40s as kind of, special events. And you don't really have special events to raise money. Like I said, that's about 6.6% of where our income comes from. You have special events to get the people you want to talk to in the room, to develop a relationship with them, to show them why they should be attached to your organization. And then, even if they can only give $100 a year at that point, they give $100 a year in their 30s. And as they get older and more financially stable, maybe they bump it up to 250, 500. Then when by the time they're in their 50s, maybe they're given a couple thousand a year. And you get a big cohort of those people, and suddenly you've got a lot of operational funds. And that's kind of the way we're trying to think about this going forward. But it is, I mean, Sheridan, is a great question, and it is a question that a lot of institutions are really, really struggling with.
Roger, you've had your hand up for about an hour. Would you like to
Sorry.
ask your question or no, 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 it's me.
Oh.
I haven't called on him, not
Uh,
Eugene.
Just a real quick one. The opioid settlement of
Mhm.
money, is that available and is it not available? What happened to it?
I don't know. I mean, we really didn't get any of that money. And I'm not sure what the state did with it, but that really didn't come our way. Um, you know, During COVID, we, just like a lot of people, we got an influx of money and it helped with some fiscal stability, but that money is gone. And I have to say, in all my career, I have never come across a better chief financial officer than the one I have now. She got that money and socked it away in different accounts and basically hid it from brother, so that and not for any mean reason, but to keep him from spending it all in one fell swoop. And she stretched that money till late last year. So she was still using some of that COVID money to really kind of sustain us and pay the bills. But it's sorry, I have a dog scratching at the door. It is really though a challenge then, and I'm not sure where the opioid money went, but to my knowledge, it didn't come our way. Um, and in the same breath, I'll say it's really easy to see the fentanyl problem in Wilmington. It is, they come into a manual dining room. And the one positive I would say is I'm originally from Philadelphia, and all that video that you've probably seen about Kensington Avenue, I knew Kensington Avenue well. I know exactly that area, and the fentanyl they're selling in Wilmington is probably a third of the strength of the stuff they're selling in Philly, because the fentanyl users in Wilmington are still semi-functional. They come into a manual dining room and they can have a conversation with you, whereas the ones in Philly are literally going comatose standing up and can't even utter a word. So it's, not that fentanyl is good news in any way, shape, or form, but at least what's in Wilmington seems to be significantly less strong than the stuff that some other cities are getting hit with, which from my perspective is not just a good thing in terms of helping people get a meal, but if they come into our program and we have to help them get drug and alcohol treatment, it's more likely to be effective because it's a weaker drug. So that's partly why I mention it and I think about it. But yeah, we haven't really seen much of the opioid money, and you'd be stunned for all of my shelters. I get about $65,000 a year from the city of Wilmington. That's it. So that's why you'll sometimes see when we have fundraisers, they're often for the shelters or the dining halls, because they are two things that are really underfunded. Some of the other stuff I get HUD grants for, or Newcastle County grants or foundation grants, but that's the tougher stuff to fund is the shelters, the dining halls, and House of Joseph too, which I mentioned, because what's happened now is HUD has funding that's called HOPWA, Housing Opportunities for People with AIDS, but that funding has shrunk and shrunk and shrunk because they basically have looked at it. Well, HIV is so treatable now, we don't need special facilities anymore. We can just put them in any old HUD facility. And we've continued to argue. And fortunately, the regional HUD director has agreed with us that there's some other values in having that facility for people with HIV, that they're sharing it with other people who are going through experiences similar to them. And you build this natural support network and community. But getting funding for that every year, I was talking to the regional HUD director, and he said, we try to help you, and I said, I know, it's like hammering a square peg into a round hole when it comes to funding. And he said, yep, you got it. So that's the other one. That really is the tough one. We managed to get some pretty solid funding for this coming year, but every year it's sort of like, okay, what about next year? What about next year?
How many residents in House of Joseph 2?
House of Joseph 2 only has about 6. It can only hold 16. It's got a couple empty beds now, which my director is looking to fill, and I know he has at least one candidate to go in. And we also have another. It's long-term permanent housing called Mother Teresa on Church Street, which is only 6 units, but it's 6 units for people with some kind of permanent disability and living with HIV. And it's a very, very nice facility. I mean, you walk in and there's a big kind of open space that's living room, dining room, and then there's actually an elevator in the building too. And you go up to the next floor and there's 6 kind of studio size apartments for the residents.
And are the residents there and in House of Joseph too, do they tend to be longer term? I mean, is there the same kind of...
they're considered long term in both cases. Yeah. That's why those things were created. Because they're, like I said, when House of Joseph was founded, it was founded the place. It was hospice. People went there to die because nobody really knew how to treat AIDS. And then obviously as it got better, kind of the mission and purpose adapted in obviously what we all know is a better way, I guess you'd say. People are living instead of dying.
Westminster had a housing program a number of years ago in partnership with AIDS Delaware. We had purchased the Girl Scout building on 13th Street. And the ground floor was offices and a conference room, and upstairs was living space. And it's called Daughtry House after Tom Daughtry, who was a member of Westminster who died of AIDS. And so that space was available for people diagnosed with HIV/AIDS. Very often back in the day, once the diagnosis came through, the families and friends wanted nothing to do with the individual. And so that was in place for about a decade, I think. And then with time, it turned out that the need was not the same. And we were having difficulty actually finding residents. So we've incorporated that into Friendship House as part of the transitional men's housing. But that was a very significant ministry there for that decade or more before the medical community could, make more of a difference.
Yeah. And I should mention too that I just recertified all the beds with Delaware Department of Health, because it used to be that all 16 were beds for people who required some kind of direct nursing supervision. And obviously that demand has been reduced. So basically we recertified the building and it's 2 houses that we connected. So the one side has 8 beds that are still for people who need nursing supervision. And the other side are folks who, in a sense, can live independently. And then if they need the nurse, they can literally go over. And fortunately, we were waiting for the state of Delaware to tell us that we had to put up an interior wall to make it 2 different facilities. And fortunately convinced them that we didn't have to do that. Because otherwise we would have had residents who were independent. If they needed help in inclement weather, they would have had to go out. And they're disabled. I mean, there's some people who have, rollators or canes. So anyhow, that's what we do there. So
what can
I just had my other friend join me.
Oh, this is not Margaret Ann.
No, this is one of my daughter's dogs, and he's my buddy, so he's
Oh,
been scratching at
apparently.
the door. Um, but anyhow, go ahead. What was the other question?
Yeah, so Jean, what can churches do most effectively to aid in your ministries?
Sure. I mean, one thing that, obviously, if you're already doing providing, meals or support for meals, um, I actually said this out loud, and now I'm going to wash in them, but I'm sure later in the year there'll be a need. One of the regular needs of um, the homeless community is underwear and socks.
Mm.
And you don't think about it, but often poor people have really lousy shoes, so they may actually put on 3 or 4 pairs of socks to provide the cushion that you and I have in shoes. So there's always a demand for socks and underwear, and for a church to do a sock and underwear drive is easy, or to do a drive for toiletries, some of this stuff. I mean, it doesn't sound like much, but it can actually be extremely helpful. And we find this stuff sort of comes in waves. Like right now, if you said, "Oh, well, you know what, we want to provide you with female hygiene kits," I'd be saying, "Please, no."
Yeah.
Like, we have so many, and we already have someone who's volunteered to make more, that we reached the point where we were calling other organizations and seeing if they needed them, because my one grant writer couldn't literally see out her window because they were just stacked up in her office. But I'll take that problem any day of the week, because I'll happily, call another organization, see if they need it, and develop that relationship that when they get an overflow, then they're going to call me. And I'm always happy to do that. But it's really anything a church is willing to do. And someone just asked a great question. I mean, honestly, Sheridan, sometimes the challenge is the bigger sizes. Like, for example, we actually, before winter comes, there's a number of people, the Knights of Columbus, Subaru, a number of places that actually do coat drives for us. And we've actually gone back to them and said, can you go for the triple and the quadruple XLs? Because sometimes we have really big people. So sometimes it's the larger sizes that are the challenge. Generally, getting stuff for men is more of a challenge. There's actually far more shelter beds for women than there are men nationwide. Men are really sort of shorted on the shelter beds and some of this other stuff as well. But back to your real question of what can a church do? I mean, almost anything that the church is willing to do, like I said, whether it's making food, supplying food, supplying socks or underwear or clothing, household items. I mean, we're sort of so comprehensive that literally, if you have, and I have this in my basement, my mother moved into a senior living facility, and of course decided she had to give me every single plate she didn't want. So I have literally boxes of dinnerware that in my life I'm never going to be able to use all of them. And I just haven't gotten around to bringing them over yet because I've had so much of her other stuff. She was a clothes horse and had to scale down considerably. But I brought all that stuff over to the distribution center so that it went out to people who needed clothes. And I've taken some of her dinnerware over there and her silverware and stuff like that you might not think is a big deal or is sitting somewhere in your attic. But for someone who's finally moving into, their first apartment or has been homeless and is finally moving back into a stable environment, plates, cups, servingware, pots, pans, that kind of stuff, is it's helpful. It just, if you get it to the distribution center, and then obviously we will never, ever, ever, ever turn down money. It's almost anything you're willing to do. Things you don't think about. We have family shelters. So, and the family shelters, I mean, one of the things that I always go for is children's books. Because the sooner you start reading to children, the better they're going to do academically. And we typically already have students. Come here, buddy. We typically have students who are or young people who are already behind, and their parents often, either didn't graduate high school or only graduated high school, and are academically challenged and don't read at a high reading level themselves. So children's books, and then adult books, but not, they're not going to read Gibbon's History of the Roman Empire, right? They're going to, but things that might be accessible to a general reader with about a sixth grade reading level. So your average mystery or, romance or science fiction, like a mass market paperback. But Mary, to your question, donations of underwear, socks, that's the kind of stuff. If you take them to that Ruth Balick distribution center, and I can actually give you all the exact address, that's typically the best place. Because then that way, if a shelter needs it, or we can funnel it out from there. And give me a second here. I have to find this. I have a picture with the address of every single one of our facilities. 1410 North Claymont is the distribution center, and it's open like 9:30 to 2:30 Tuesday through Friday, and they do close for lunch. I think it's 12:30 to 1, but call and check on that before you drive over there. It might be 12 to 12:30. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. But that's the place that if you're going to donate, socks, underwear, furniture, dinnerware, that kind of stuff, that boom right there. If you've got a big donation of food, then it's kind of your choice. In terms of dry goods, the distribution center or one of the Emmanuel dining rooms. But the distribution center there is still probably the best one because, for example, Renzi pasta sometimes gives us donations. So right now I have 2 giant pallets of Renzi pasta up on one of those, storage shelves, along with a pallet of olive oil, and then it's rather than overwhelming the kitchens and them having a storage problem, we'll ship some out to them. And then, the directors of the various dining rooms will let us know, and we'll get our maintenance crew to bring more over.
Prior to COVID, when we would have an event at church and there would be, giant pasta containers or salad or whatever, and if we had food left over, we would call Mary Mother of Hope and see if they wanted. Is that still an appropriate?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We get it all the time. People calling one of the shelters, or even if you wanted to go to Emmanuel dining room. There's a number on the outside, because if you're not aware, on top of Emmanuel dining room there at 2nd and Jackson is Mary Mother of Hope 2. So there's always a staffer there, and they know they've got the key to kind of let people into the dining hall and put that stuff in there.
Yeah, that's what we've done, and I didn't know if it was still appropriate.
Oh no, absolutely. That's totally feasible as well too. If you want to call, one of the shelters, and see if they're willing to take it as well. And they typically are. It's pretty rare that they're so backed up they don't have the room for it. But they're very happy to have it. Like every year, St. John, the Beloved Catholic Church, has a fish fry. Whatever's left over, they already prearranged that they're going to take all the leftovers, properly seal them up, and they bring them over to Emmanuel dining room. So that that stuff gets used. And we have a number of congregations that do that sort of stuff.
Well, Gene, I want to thank you so much for being here tonight. As I say, I'm suspecting that many of the people at Westminster think of Emmanuel dining room, period, the end.
Well, that's a lot of people. And what I'm going to put in the chat here, if people have further questions, here is my email. Here you go. If I can send it, there it goes. But if anybody's got further questions, please feel free to email me, or if you want to get involved or whatever the case might be. But yeah, we are much more than a manual dining room, but that's mostly what people think of us as.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, thank you. And thank you
Thank you.
all for being here. Please share the information widely with family, friends, and strangers on the street. Let them know what the Ministry of Caring is doing and how they can help. Jean, given all the work that you've done on bringing this settlement together, I think you need to like have a nap or,
Oh, yeah,
you
no, no.
know,
Now the fun begins because we can put a shovel in the ground. So
okay.
we've got 2 weeks by law to get a shovel in the ground.
Okay, well, put
So
the shovel in the ground and then
I
have a
know,
nap. How about that?
I know.
Yeah.
So
Thank you
thank
so
you very
much.
much.
Great.
Thank you all.
Take
Thank you
care.
all. Good night.